All right, thank you. So I'm going to talk about ultrasonic attack on network communication environments. We call it Nuance. My co-author, Forrest McKee, and I'm David Noever, and we're in the United States. So the problem statement we're trying to address is, can an attacker or a hacker send inaudible commands covertly onto voice-activated devices? So this is largely a demonstration from an experimental standpoint, but also we wanted to understand the nature of these voice-activated devices. How common are they, and where would they appear in day-to-day life? So the outline of the talk is I'm going to go through an introduction to both a hardware and software vulnerability in voice-activated devices. So that actually can be the phone, or it can be a computer if you have Windows Cortana, or it can be a standalone device like Amazon Alexa. We're going to demonstrate that we've developed it as what's called Nuance attack. So that was a term that was first coined in February of 2023 as the near ultrasound inaudible Trojan. There are two versions we'll discuss. One is a single device, so that could be your phone broadcasting and receiving, or it can be two devices, so a phone broadcasting to a computer or vice versa. And we're going to extend that to multiple networked configurations. So you might consider, if it's Nuance 1 and 2, we're going to talk about Nuance N, which is multiple network devices. And each one of these devices will have escalating skills, meaning they could do different kinds of things on voice activation and also larger attack surfaces. It's largely a demonstration. We're going to show you some scoring results and finally discuss future work. So this is basically the attack we're talking about. An attacker comes up with a phone recording. In this case, most of these devices, these are Amazon Alexas, but most of these devices with a wake word, such as Alexa or Hey Google or Hey Cortana or Hey Siri. Those would be four examples of common devices. But rather than broadcast in the audible range, you can shift the frequency to a range that's, generally speaking, inaudible to humans. So that begins about 16 kilohertz as a high frequency attack. So in some people like to call it a dog whistle attack. You've taken a normal command and you shifted its frequency. And so there's a couple different configurations. In this case, the phone is the broadcaster and the Internet of Things device is the receiver. The reason it exists is because these microphones have a gain to them, or a nonlinear gain, particularly at the high frequency range. And so we'll take advantage of that. But this would be a classic, what would be called a two device attack, an Android device to an Echo Dot generation 2 or 3. And the attack might simply say, Alexa, what's the weather? And no one else in the room would be aware of this attack. So it's somewhat of a stealth attack. So why be interested in voice activated devices, and why might they need security references? There are about 8.4 billion digital devices expected in 2024. That's a doubling from the current number, which is about 4.2 billion. So basically one device per human globally. These are listening devices really within arm's reach almost any time of day, particularly the phone. 36% of global users have a voice-activated phone or some capability to reach it through voice. Of course, the convenience is the Internet of Things, such as a personal assistant or music player. And of course, it's not just that the devices have them, but about 3.1 billion voice searches appear per month. So Alexa, tell me the weather is an example. And that's about 4 per person per year. One of the strange things from convenience, when you think about the way that these devices are set up, is that they have no natural concept of administrative privilege or identity. So you could say Some of them you can establish a profile, but basically there's no common sense of voice authentication. Siri probably is the first one to have any sort of profile in a biometric sense. The other interesting part about these voice-activated devices is how much potential power they give to the attacker. So, for example, you can access someone's search history. What did this device look for last week? And we'll show some examples of that. You also can probe or search personal information, such as prior purchases. You can look at someone's personal finance or in fact, trigger purchases, particularly on the Amazon side. People obviously aren't unaware of this. About 42% of the shoppers for voice-activated devices cite audio security as their #1 buying concern. So this is kind of a pictorial way of showing that these always listening microphones have become quite popular, and they are a common interface to our security environment. This is a matrix which kind of describes the sender and receiver in this attack. So, and the references here are prior work. So, for example, an iPhone attacking an iPhone. This could be a self attack, or it could be a cross attack between source and target. iPhone attacking Alexa, iPhone attacking a computer. If it's a Windows computer, Cortana. iPhone attacking an Android phone. And finally, you can embed these voice activation within the silent parts of another broadcast, so it could sit on YouTube. And finally, many of these voice activated devices control other parts of the home. So for example, you can have a voice activated Alexa that unlocks the door. And so there have been probably 4 to 5 major papers that have attempted to kind of map this matrix. We're primarily going to focus on this part, which is using an Android phone to attack an Alexa device in interesting ways. So I do mention prior security work on voice activation. This also includes sensors associated with ultrasound on, for example, a car. But they go by these broad sense of dolphin attack, meaning it's a distorted command at high frequency. The difference between what we're doing and what this is typically is these require some kind of special amplifier. Like they don't have an obvious way. You could just, in a stealth way, take a device up to another device. They need some augmentation. Another one is a surfing attack. So that would be like a long range attack with a voice assistant. So you just broadcast out ultrasound. It's almost more like a jamming attack. The other one is of course, using ultrasound high frequency to broadcast. So create a covert channel that is beyond human hearing. And then finally, the group we're really talking about, which is inaudible Trojan. So you're sending an unwanted command to another device, either in 1 or 2 pairs. So there are a number of places in our lives that these exist. They certainly aren't just Internet of Home things. They're Internet of all kinds of things, including the cars, including workplaces, including many of them, your entire computing experience is run through, say, Hey Cortana exercise from on the Windows side, and of course, different personal assistants. So it's a pretty broad spectrum of what you could call the attack surface. So what do people use voice activation for? And this will get really to the heart of what we tried to accomplish in the paper. And this is kind of a frequency from a industry survey in which this is the rank order of questions asked to voice activated devices. And most of these are kind of the convenience questions. So you want to listen to the news or set an alarm. But very quickly, when you get down into this group, these are quite personal questions, such as control my smart home, or access my calendar, or message someone, or finally make a purchase. So in this case, probably 35% of all use frequencies do involve the person has at least once tried to make a purchase from the voice activated device. So if in the extreme case, you could imagine someone sort of walking around with their wallet or their purse, and someone inadvertently, in a stealth sort of way, could trigger that purse to open. And generally speaking, these kind of escalation of activities that can happen in an ultrasound way can trigger some very unusual skills. So we looked at the example of the Amazon Alexa universe, but almost all of these devices do have a sort of skill associated with them. In fact, the Alexa universe has about 70,000 different skills, everything from tell me a joke to purchase something to check my bank account. So this is an interesting, this is actually from a US patent that Amazon got for the Alexa, but the cartoon here is the person in this case just coughs, and that Alexa hears that trigger, and that leads to a whole cascade of events, everything from sort of ordering food for the cough, so ordering chicken soup in this case, or it can start ordering cough drops for you just from the cough, and then finally, confirm that order. So I think this is kind of an interesting event cascade from something that maybe people don't expect these devices to do, but it's a single trigger that leads to either medical advice, cooking instructions, or in some sense, a purchase agreement. The other thing that was kind of interesting is what a second patent issued to Amazon. Many of these may not be on every device, but it's an interesting kind of way of thinking about the attack surface. And that we call in the paper kind of a poisoning attack, in the sense that this is a typical recommender system that Amazon is describing. So the device is listening in the background to a story about a vacation to the zoo. That device is enabled to pull out key events from the conversation, such as who's the speaker, what are they talking about, in this case, a winery in Santa Barbara. And there are actually two speakers in this conversation, and they're attaching different interests to them. So it's not all that different from shopping on Amazon, where you, for example, view an item. I think it's just a little, maybe it's less comfortable when it's extracting your likes and dislikes from the conversation itself. And this is kind of a cartoon, I think, from a Google Home example of the, say, 66 different places these devices typically might sit in a home. So one of the things we did is we did a classic teardown of the Echo Dot. And so if you unpack this device during the attack, or certainly to try and understand what's happening, the key to this, there are really there are two printed circuit boards, and then there's an interface that the user has, which is really these buttons: turn up the volume, turn down the volume, mute the device, or give it power. But what we're showing here from our teardown are these 7 spots, which are all associated with the microphone. So it has some ability, when it gets a command, a familiar blue ring will trigger that says I'm listening. And if you have a device that has the ultrasound attack replaying, then that device can be owned through these microphones. There's other interesting parts to this, like the speaker itself, and the speaker contacts that we were able to identify by part number. So this is the basic ultrasound attack in a different view. So in some sense, it's a modulated signal. So in the original paper from other researchers who started looking at this, it's sometimes called the single upper sideband amplitude modulation, or SUSBAM. But the idea is to take the 0 to roughly 22,000 kilohertz signal of a spoken command and flatten the amplitude below 16 kilohertz. So this makes it inaudible to the human ear. It could be audible to babies or small children. At a certain age, the human ear no longer can hear these high frequency sounds. But the message is flattened here and shifted here. You think if you took this entire frequency space and shifted the bell curve or the frequency here, it turns out you do not get enough bandwidth in frequency space to get the command to trigger. So you cut the signal in half and you take just the right half of the bell curve. So that's why you get this sort of familiar shape, and it can happen on any command. And we did about 50 different Alexa experiments where we're issuing commands for the device to do different things, and each time we flatten low frequency and then cut off the left arm of this curve. In time domain, this is the waveform. So this would be 4 repetitions of Alexa, what's the weather? Alexa, what's the weather? Alexa, what's the weather? Etc. And that would be one session. And then we do that multiple times and watch the results. The spectrogram, again, is a version of this, but you see there's no real power to the spectrum below 16 kilohertz. And this is where your sort of 4-pronged signal, Alexa, where's the weather? Alexa, where's the weather? All the power is in the high frequency. This is a different version of that, which is overlaid on the same signal. And you'll see a couple of these, but this is your original human spoken term. This is the modulated version, and this is the waveform as it might appear on the microphone. So the original contribution of the work is to generalize what previously has been shown as a 1 or 2 device attack into multiple attacks. People have anywhere from 8 to 10 of these in different rooms of the house or different rooms of the business, or you can imagine in a conference room the number of phones that might be listening. So this would be what we would describe as an ultrasound 3 attack. This device is broadcasting to these 2 Internet of Things devices, and they both activate at the same time, executing different commands. And this would be the generalization to 4. So you have your attacker device here, which is replaying an ultrasound attack inaudibly, and these to the human, but these 3 devices pick up on it simultaneously. So we wanted to be a little systematic and disciplined about the way to approach this kind of attack. And so we did want to map it to what's called the MITRE attack framework for people in cybersecurity. This is kind of familiar, but generally speaking, this is a kind of slice of that table in which you're looking at what the attacker might want to achieve. So for example, initial access to the device, typically, even in an audible sense, is quite easy. That's the purpose of these convenience devices, is given a wake word, gain initial access. So sometimes you could imagine this would be drive-by compromise. The attacker just passes the device and his recording is playing on a loop, and that would be a drive-by compromise. The good part is you're interested in defending against these kind of attacks. And so each attack is paired to what's called a defend attack. So it is written in this elite form of where an alphabetic term is given a number. But generally, some of like initial access is really a user training issue, like set up a profile that only responds to your voice. So that would be security awareness training. And then in the paper, we map whether that tactic and technique of the attacker also has a tactic and technique for the defender, and whether the device or this approach is potentially an ultrasonic attack. Privilege escalation is I gain sort of power to execute commands on a valid account, and credential access is a third category where I'm able to hold an ongoing conversation with the device without the user's knowledge. So this is a scorecard from the paper of us running 50 different commands. So this is a list, simple tabulation of the multiple commands. So for example, Alexa, set the volume to 5. That's typically a first move if you're an attacker, is you don't want, even though you're broadcasting inaudibly, you don't want the device to respond in a high volume sense. So a lot of the first attack is set the volume to 6% or something like that. And so we tracked whether you could do that in the audible space for 50 commands, and that had 100% success rate. And then this category is whether the device, in this case, an Echo Generation 2, whether that failed or succeeded. And there's two versions of success here. One is, did it trigger any response of acknowledgement? So the blue ring on the device comes on, so it's listening. Or did it fully succeed, meaning it executed the command, meaning you ask it what the weather is inaudibly and it responds audibly. And it turns out the success rate overall in the ultrasound version is 58%. Really only 16% failed outright. 26% at least triggered acknowledgement, and 58% triggered the actual command execute. So we wanted, that raises some interesting questions. We did use a text-to-speech generator just to make it sort of repeatable. So this is not triggering by a particular person's voice. And we did use the same ultrasonic algorithm to shift the frequency. So you can ask, why are these devices only 60% successful, really 85% successful, at least in one capacity? And so we wanted to segregate those results and explore some additional network skills. So an important part of debugging that signal is, can you recover it from the ultrasound? And meaning you upshift the signal and then you want to demodulate it back to the audible, the original audible signal. So this is an example where you have your input and then you shift it to a high frequency and then you recover it back. And that reversibility is important. If you imagine defensive filtering, it turns out the device itself, when you ask it a question, it's sending the signal from that microphone to, you could call it the mothership or a server, in this case run by Alexa, and at some point they demodulate it. And we'll show you where you can debug listening to what the server is receiving in an ultrasound case. In fact, that's what this is. An important part of the paper's demonstration is to show not only are you triggering actions at the microphone, but you're also triggering a cascade of events on the server. Turns out Alexa, for privacy reasons, does, at least to the user, allow someone to review you the entire voice history of the device. So today's commands are all history. So it turns out on the server, there's a voice profile. So the device is actually trying to figure out who's speaking. And then you can hit this play button in this case, one of the commands was, how do you spell apple? And this was a successful ultrasound attack, and the device responded by giving the answer APPL. And it's very interesting to replay it when it's demodulated by the server. And of course, it does sound, as you would imagine, similar when it's shifted back into audible. So this debugging cycle of what did we send, and what was received, kind of has this nice 3-panel. You're looking at the original input signal across all the spectrum here. And this is the waveform asking it a question, and this is the spectrogram of power. So the attack we're talking about has shifted all of this energy to high frequency. You still see the carrier signal here. There's no activity in the audible range. And then at the actual microphone and the server, you do see the original signal in some form or another here, and all the power has been remapped into audible. And at this point it is actionable. This is another version that kind of lines all these four pieces up. And so you have your, if you start here, you have your headphone. This, I guess, is from the speaker to our modification of the signal to the demodulated version on the device to the demodulated spoken version on the server in both waveform and spectrogram. And so it gives a kind of a nice view of the whole ecosystem associated with this inaudible command. And so we wanted to map this to a whole scenario of attacks, and this is just one of them that we used within the paper to illustrate the potential of this kind of cybersecurity issue. And we walked it through various stages. In this case, if you're talking about one device broadcasting to many, you can embed this ultrasound signal in another signal, so it can broadcast from, for example, a public announcer, a PA system, at a stadium. In the silent section, you could trigger all the devices in a stadium. That was a scenario that we thought was interesting. That would be the extreme of a Trojan attack on, say, 100,000 devices at a football stadium. The other one is to embed it in a viral video, say a TikTok video or a YouTube video, and the ultrasound signal is in a silent section, either at the beginning, the middle, or end of that broadcast, and you would randomly trigger some action on the other side. There is a kind of timing element to that. These devices don't typically, there's a narrow gap between the wake word where you say Alexa and the command, and so you have to get all of that kind of right. We did trigger this in our own code using Python, which gives you the ability to make it not only through text to speech, but also through many downstream analytics we were able to run on the attack and defend. So you really want to pay attention to different ways you would want to defend this kind of attack, and we offer kind of 5 different broad categories. You could shield the device. These devices have a geometric sensitivity, so for example, they don't respond well in a highly reflective environment, such as a corner with sharp surfaces like a shelf. So you could design devices that potentially could acoustically shield you. An obvious thing is to frequency filter high frequency. If it's inaudible, you shouldn't broadcast it. We think the Defender has a number of machine learning techniques, some of which we've already developed to classify, is this likely an ultrasound attack or not? Is there enough energy in the 2 different windows that you saw? And obviously, just like the internet, if you're on Amazon's device or Amazon's website or Apple's website with Siri, user authentication is an obvious gateway that you would want, particularly for executing sensitive actions. So these devices probably have come on so strong in the last, say, 2 to 3 years, and people are comfortable in the sort of privacy of their home without authentication. But it's certainly possible to imagine devious things happening. And of course, the real challenge we mentioned in the paper is this is a distributed network, and many of these devices may not have the ability to regularly have security updates, for example, a thermostat, and device level security updates may not have hardware associated with, for example, adjusting the microphone. And so this is in the appendix of the paper, we go through the full spectrum of attack techniques. We map it to known attacks and different ways to defend them, and whether they would be all of these cases. So lateral movement from device to device, ways to get command and control, and ways to exfiltrate data would be all stages of a cyber attack. So for future work, we want to build on this one-to-many concept. There are so many different network configurations to consider. Even in a one-to-one device, there's many different, so that would be kind of the broad configuration. There's also a deep configuration, meaning once an attacker has control of the device, you can bridge it to deeper and deeper skills through task chaining. And that was kind of like the example we showed earlier, where a simple cough leads to a call to the doctor, or a purchase of cough drops, or even a food recipe. We hope to get more into the physics of these microphones. How is that nonlinear gain being modulated and demodulated? And so we have some examples going on now of small devices that mimic these, that allow us to run more diagnostics on the specific microphone. We want to look at what I would call the identity manager aspect and the scale of it. So we've run, in our example, several runs of 50 different commands. You can imagine 500 different commands under different profiles. So for example, a child's voice, a woman's voice, a gender or an age difference. So that's the text to speech. And clearly, if we're succeeding 84% of the time, we want to look at sensitivity to what makes it, the geometry I've mentioned, the proximity. This is typically a pretty close up attack. So in the case of two devices, the ultrasound needs to be close to one device. And so the obvious thing is digital signal processing. So with that, I will turn it back to the floor, and I appreciate your attention. Thank you.